Welcome everybody. I'm Harvey Miller. I'm Director of the Center for Urban Regional Analysis here at Ohio State. And welcome to our panel discussion this afternoon. This is the first of 3 autumn 2018 events focusing on the theme of mobility and equity. Other events we're going to have this fall, November 9th, also here in Thompson Library, but on the top floor in the campus reading room from 12 to 1. We'll have Todd Littman, who's a very well-known transportation consultant and blogger. And he's the founder of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute in Victoria, BC, Canada. And he'll be talking about preparing for a changing future, emerging planning issues. He'll be talking about changes in demographics and disruptive technologies such as ride sharing and autonomous vehicles. So we're really looking forward to his presentation on November 9th. And on November 16th, here in 165, we're going to have Professor Noreen McDonald. She's chair of the Department of City and Regional Planning and director of the Carolina Transportation Program at the University of North Carolina. And she will be speaking on healthcare, transportation services, how technology and shared mobility are changing options and behaviors. That's another topic near and dear, I think, to our heart here in Columbus and with the Smart Columbus Project. I want to thank our partners this semester on all 3 of these events surrounding mobility and equity. Our partners are the OSU Office of Outreach and Engagement, the Center for Human Ethics and Values, the OSU Corporate Engagement Office, the Office of Energy and Environment, and last but not least, the Sustainable and Resilient Economy Initiative. I can't believe I had to look down and just remember that. But we're very thankful for all of our partners, and we hope that you enjoy this event, and we're thankful for their support. So as always, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, at OSU CURA, very easy to remember on Twitter. And also come to cura.osu.edu, and you can sign up for our newsletter, and you'll never miss an event or any of the great activities that goes on here in the Center for Urban Regional Analysis at Ohio State. Today's panel, Mobility and Equity, Can Transportation Make Columbus a More Equitable Community? And we've assembled just a stellar panel. I've been like up all night with excitement just waiting for this discussion today. Stellar panel of community voices. We're going to talk about this issue about transportation and its role in making Columbus a more socially equitable community. Now I'm going to introduce the speakers in alphabetical order, and I think we can just proceed that way. There's no other ordering that I could think of. Jennifer Adair, right there, is the Equal Opportunity Program Manager serving the Ohio Department of Administrative Services, but today she is here as the chair of the North Linden Area Commission. Under her leadership, the North Linden Area Commission has worked with community partners on issues of mobility and equality, including Smart City, CODA CMAX, Cleveland Avenue Human Trafficking Initiative, Celebrate One, Linden Safe Streets, and other city community efforts. Jennifer is a proud graduate of Columbus City Centennial High School, Northwestern University, and Catholic University Law School. Mandy Bishop. They're sitting in alphabetical order, at least so far. Katie's going to screw that up in a second. Mandy Bishop serves as the Deputy Director of the Public Service Smart Columbus Program Manager. She is responsible for delivery of the Smart Columbus operating system, systems engineering documentation, interagency coordination, contracting and partner selection, as well as other aspects of the US DOT and Paul G. Allen grant-funded Smart Columbus project. Mandy holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Ohio State University. She actually used all 3 letters in capital. And is a registered Ohio professional engineer and surveyor and intern. Josh Lapp. Josh is chair of Transit Columbus, a nearly 10-year-old nonprofit advocacy group working to create a better connected Columbus. For his day job, he is the co-founder and principal of Designing Local, an urban planning firm with a focus on preservation, public art, and public engagement. Josh is a Central Ohio native and a graduate of Ohio State as well. Aslyne Rodriguez. Aslyne. There she is. She's a co-founder and CEO of Empowerbus. Empowerbus provides dependable, workforce-ready citizens with dignified, reliable, on-time transportation to and from work. Empowerbus is also strengthening the roads to social mobility by providing transportation to healthcare and educational resources. Aslyne graduated from Ohio University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and a minor in Spanish. And Katie White. Katie White is, raise your hand, Katie, just everyone knows you, is the director of the Age-Friendly Communities Initiative at the Ohio State University College of Social Work. Her dedication to age-inclusive planning serves as the foundation for Age-Friendly Columbus Initiative, which originally started in the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission and now has transferred to Ohio State. And this continues to guide her daily work advocating with and for older adults. Ms. White studied gerontology and spent her career working and volunteering with older adults. So this is a great panel. Join me in welcoming them. Everyone. And we'll just have a few minutes, just everyone, giving everyone about 5 minutes for introductory comments, and then we'll have a more interactive discussion, and we'll just go in alphabetical order. So Jennifer, please.
Good afternoon. I'm going to turn this on. Is it on? Hello?
Just hold it.
Hold it?
Yeah, hold it
Okay, now it's on. There we go. So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Jennifer Adair. I am the state's Equal Opportunity Program Manager, so for the state departments and agencies in Ohio. And I am here today as asked in my capacity as chair of the North Linden Area Commission to join this great panel. And if you aren't familiar with the way that the area commissions work here in Columbus, lots of areas have commissions. Not every area is covered. You guys have one here at Ohio State as well. And what we do is act as liaison between the citizens and the city. We are established by city charter, but we are volunteers. So we don't get paid. We're just regular people who want to serve our community. And we do a lot of recommendations to the city. So when great projects like Smart Cities or CODA or other projects come, we gather a lot of community input and help to ensure that our citizens' voices are heard. North Linden is part of the greater Linden area, and you guys may know about that. You may have heard some things going on in Linden. We're kind of a hot area right now in the city of Columbus. We have a lot going on. But it's a pretty large area. It's a very diverse area. I say we have just about one of everybody there, literally. We have great affordable housing, but we also have a lot of challenges, which we are working on. We extend north all the way up to Cook Road, and then we jog up by Ferris. So if you're familiar, like where DeSales High School or former Brookhaven was, we go up north that way. We come back down Cleveland Avenue, there's an abandoned rail line that we actually border all the way back down. And then South Linden, if you know where St. Stephen's is, it kind of comes around the bottom there. So we are a pretty large area, and then 71 is our border on the other side. So a really large area in Columbus. Even though we are very close to the center city, and we do have a lot of major transit that goes through our community, we do know that transportation is something that is a challenge for our residents, especially when we are talking about health. We talk about getting to centers of employment here, and of course we talk about that kind of mobility that isn't public transportation, but we're talking about extra types of mobility like Uber and things like that. People just can't afford to take that sort of thing. And so we do have a lot of initiatives and projects in the neighborhood right now. We're excited that Smart Cities is there. We have our CMAX line. We also, just like you guys have here, we have scooters and bikes, and we have the go cars, but they're gone from the city now. But they didn't quite work well in our neighborhood, I think, just from an affordability standpoint. But I have seen a lot of younger residents, in particular, use the scooters and the bikes. Just to kind of tie in my job as from the state perspective, mobility and transportation is something that we also have to pay close attention to when we are talking about diversity and inclusion in our employment. As a state of Ohio, we have centers of employment all over the state, and our largest employer is the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. And you guys may know or not know, but our prisons are typically not in Center City. And so that poses a problem. We have a lot of great jobs, we have a lot of great benefits, but people just can't get there because of transportation and mobility issues. So it is something that's important to look at as kind of a neighborhood perspective in terms of the people living there, but then also I can put on my employer hat and talk about it in that way too. It is definitely a part of our diversity and inclusion initiatives to consider those factors when promoting our jobs in the state of Ohio. So I'm excited to talk with you guys and answer questions.
Thank you, Mandy.
What, on one slide?
Sure.
The one slide?
One slide. Is that in the same?
They're all in there.
No, that's not true.
So this is not.
That's your.
It's a great slide.
That's it.
It's a very good picture right there.
This one right here, right?
Yep.
Oh,
There we go. Suspense lifted.
I think I recognize that guy.
Yeah, we all should. Never has there been a more exciting time to talk in transportation. There's so many new transportation options coming online, and never have we had a greater ability to make transportation more equitable. Our mayor firmly believes this. He doesn't just say it. And the statement was a bit too esoteric for me to internalize, so I had to think back to when I turned 16 and my dad bought me that first car with all 4 tires looking different, AM radio, and it was hideous vehicle. And once I got past the fact of what it was, I was able to get in that vehicle and get to school, get to work, get to sports, get to all the things that were important to me, and I could not ever imagine that transportation wasn't something that brought me to things, and having transportation be my barrier to getting to anything I wanted to do. And that's just, there's a lot of people in Columbus, Central Ohio, the world, the country, that face that every day, and that's their first barrier to getting to being able to live their best lives. I am with Smart Columbus. My day-to-day job is solely focused on the delivery of the U.S. Department of Transportation grants and the Paul G. Allen Family Philanthropies grant. But I've spent all of my career in transportation, almost 20 years now, a lot. And what I've seen over the course of my career, I've been deputy director of ODOT at ODOT in planning, and led a task force focused on how to fund transportation and look at all our inequities and how to bring more people into the system and participate in everyday lives. In my role as Smart Columbus Program Manager, again back to the excitement and the opportunities that we have before us, we're using a lot of our time and investments to using technology to bring people connect people to transportation. We have some very specific applications that we're working on. We're working on a cognitive disability application to help people find their way around, get to the bus, on the bus, off the bus, and to their final destination. We're working collaboratively with the Ohio State University on that to make that happen. We also have a multimodal trip planning app, and I used to kind of sell that as, hey, all these folks, it's going to connect low-income and minority people to our transportation system, and the true fact is, it probably isn't at first. It's going to be for folks of means, because it's going to, the first mile, last mile issues that are likely the most solvable are going to be solved by the Uber and Lyfts. But nonetheless, it lays the foundation for mobility as a service. Maybe one day you can't afford that $400 a month or $300 a month car payment, but maybe you can afford a package of $125 a month that gives you 10 car rides, 50 bus trips, and 10 bike trips, and helps you design transportation around your life instead of having to own each thing to do what you need to do. I think a lot of the excitement also around transportation and things that we have to tackle, will be questions in this panel, is tackling the conversation around equity in transportation. And when we think of equity, we automatically go to transit, and that's great because it can move a lot of people, but it's also one of our most underfunded public resources in Ohio. It is not elevated to the same importance as a car. Highways are in the grand scheme of things, are well funded. And so we need to transition that conversation about transportation from, again, roads and bridges to transportation.
Okay, great. Josh?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, I am Josh Lapp. I'm the chair of Transit Columbus. We are a nonprofit transit advocacy group. I'm also the token male on the panel today. That's the first thing. It's really great for transportation, actually, talking about equity. So Transit Columbus, we are an all-volunteer, multimodal advocacy group, and we've really been focusing on thinking about how we can help improve transit in the region, also bikeability, walkability, all active transportation modes. We're really advocating for those on a regional level. We don't really have a geographic footprint per se, but we're thinking about Columbus and our suburbs, Franklin County, the Central Ohio area, and how we can connect both internally and externally. So we've advocated for better connections, to Chicago and other places around the country via rail. But we are also really, particularly at this point, committed to internal connections within the city of Columbus and our metro area. And if you want to check out more of what we've worked on, you can go to transitcolumbus.org. And then Mandy, our vice chair, is over there as well. So, but I want to take a moment and say thank you, because we're actually working pretty closely with most of the people on this panel right now, or their organizations, because Columbus is really a collaborative community. And so when we're having conversations, we're all there. I know I'll be on a panel next week for Age-Friendly Columbus. But when we think about equity, I think in terms of transportation, we really need to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So I think most of the people in the room here are probably well-educated or on their way to being well-educated, of means, and are able. We don't have lots of problems getting around, so maybe the people that we need to be focused on are not the ones that are sitting in this room. It's easy for me to go out and get around the city on a scooter, per se, but I don't know how that would work for a senior or somebody that can't afford to pay for that. So I think we really need to change our mindset about the entire transportation system, and particularly how we fund it. So when was the last time we voted on an interchange, whether or not we were going to fund that? Never, not in Columbus anyway. But we do have to vote on a transit levy every time we want additional funding. The state funding for transit in Ohio is abysmal. I mean, it's one of the lowest per capita in the country. It's actually technically the bare minimum. They fund at the bare minimum funding level that the federal government requires them to. And so we really just have to change our entire mindset. And so that's what we're trying to do at Transit Columbus, both on a local level, on a state level. Of course, we can have very little impact on a federal level, but we can get our federal officials in Ohio to get on the right side, and many of them are. So with that, I will pass it along.
Thank you. And you have slides, right?
Yeah, I can navigate over there if you prefer.
If you want, there's a microphone
Sure.
here, so.
I spent too many. So I'm Aslyne Rodriguez, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Empowerbus. Empowerbus is a social enterprise that is strengthening your roads to social mobility. And what that means is really focusing on getting folks from low to moderate income communities to and from work, education, and healthcare. And the way that it works for us is that we really understand clustering. So where do the people live to get to a facility? And so just think about the way school bus stops work, right? The school bus doesn't stop at everybody's house, but they understand, okay, this is where these kids live, and this is where their stop is. So we do clustering, and when we talk about transportation for Empowerbus, dignified is really, really important. And the reason it's important is because originally this was a school bus idea. In 1930, the last time buses were thought of and redone was 1939, right? And I say jokingly, because I was a teacher, they're a petri dish for bullying, because when my kids got off the bus and they got bullied on the bus, then that set the tone for the day, and then they had to go back on that bus, right? And so when we were thinking about redoing school buses, a mentor of mine said, you're thinking too small. What if you picked up the kids and took them to school, but then you went back and picked up their parents and took them to work? I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, right? And then I had a school principal who I love and admire say to me, he's a 6'3" black man, and he said, hey, how comfortable do you think I'd fit in a school bus? I was like, yeah, probably not that comfortable. And then he said, and when do you see adults getting on school buses? He's like, usually when they're incarcerated. He's like, so is that dignified? So that really stuck with us, right? And so that's why we say dignified, reliable, on-time transportation. We're microtransit. As we exist today, we're 15-passenger vans. If you've seen Chariot and Share in town, we have the big city buses. We've moved our model toward that. And we take them to places of employment. That's our primary focus. Healthcare and education will be a secondary focus for us. So right now, we're picking up, one of our engagements is picking up Huckleberry House youth. If you're familiar with Huckleberry House, they provide emergency housing for homeless youth or temporarily homeless youth, and we take them to work at the Tascala. The idea behind this is that we're decreasing losses for the company because they have high turnover rates in entry-level jobs, and we're increasing the stability. In the case of the individuals we're transporting, it is the most they've ever made. I'm not saying it's good enough. Make sure that I'm saying that. I'm not saying it's a good enough amount, but I am saying it's the most that they've made, and it's on the road to stability. Who's doing this already? Google, Facebook, Etsy, eBay, and they're doing it for their professional workforce, right? We want to do it for folks like these companies. Whoops, went too far. Right? They do entry-level manufacturing. We are, as Central Ohio, we want to be the biggest logistics hub, and we're heading that way. And so, we know that in some cases, because of the way COVID runs, and they've been great, they serve really great spots, but second and third shift is hard because they don't run at the end of third shift. So third shift can not get there, but they can get home. Second shift can't get home. They can't be all things to all people, but we can fill in that gap, right? And so Uber's too expensive. A car, in some cases they don't have or it's not reliable. A bike, we jokingly say, is Pelotonia. And the Jetsons don't exist, right? But we are thinking about the future. And the way we're thinking about this is that we believe our riders deserve to know where their bus is at. So we're using the same technology Google's using to transport their folks so that they know, just like Uber and Lyft, where our vehicles are at. We also believe it's an opportunity to educate people. So as a former educator, I believe that it could be the magic school bus. Maybe Mrs. Frizzle's not there, but we can do that. So we had somebody teaching English, an actual person teaching English as a second language. And the 2.0 version of Empowerbus is such that we will have tablets that people can learn. We will crowdsource the content so that they can learn while on commute, in their commute. And the last part is this. A lot of times when you're talking about entry-level employment, the employers always say we don't have enough people. So the one thing that we do is we partner with agencies like Huckleberry House, Us Together, Jewish Family Services, Chris Ohio, a lot of services that are doing workforce development. We cannot promise the people, but what we can promise is that we'll connect them. What we can also promise is if that company does not do right by the people, we don't have to stay, right? So for us, while we want to be a scalable, profitable company, we also want to be a fair and responsible company. And we've made that very clear to the employers. If you do not treat these folks well, we do not have to stay. And if we don't stay, they don't go to work because we are their way to work. And so that's really important to us. And that's how we work. The revenue model is such that the employer pays all, if not all, they pay a good portion of it. And our recommendation is that if they want to share the cost with the rider, that it's not more than it costs for them to ride CODA. Other opportunities, we do special events, healthcare and education engagements, and we're Empowerbus.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Kate White from H Friendly Columbus.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. Just a brief overview of Age Friendly Columbus. This is an initiative that the World Health Organization started in 2010. with the converging changes in cities where individuals wanted to live in walkable downtown urban core or something that felt and looked like that, as well as the doubling of our 65 plus population. And when you read it in the news, sort of generally, it's posed as this really negative, the boomers are coming and they're going to collapse every system. But in the age-friendly cities movement, we're changing that. We're not collapsing the system, we are the system. We built the system, there are changes that need to be done, and we're going to be part of that solution. So that's really important for us. We're sort of trying to shift the paradigm of older adults needing so many things and actually older adults being in the community and continuing to be part of the solution, if not all of the solution. So in 2016, Columbus entered this World Health Organization and AARP network of age-friendly communities. So that committed us to a 5-year process of improvement. The first year was a research study, the second year was planning, and both of those were done at Morksey. And then the project moved to the College of Social Work for our 3 years of implementing that strategic plan that we wrote. And that was really intentional. We wanted to be research-based, we wanted to be housed in an organization that's committed to equity and accessibility. And so we moved the entire project to the College of Social Work, and then we moved it right back out into the community where we hold offices at Blackburn Community Center in Old Town East. So making sure that we're still accessible in a community that we know has a large population of older adults, so we can sort of work in this balance of working in the micro world and the macro world at the same time. So we're working on 54 action steps over the next 3 years, which is insane, and it's meant to be. It's meant to be fast-paced, it's meant to be a mile wide and a mile deep, and it's meant to be inclusive. So our committees, our strategies, new programs, funding, we put older adults and individuals with disabilities at the forefront as much as possible. When we wrote our survey, we passed it through our elder council. You might have heard recently we're expanding what we've learned from Columbus to an age-friendly Franklin County. So we're working with cities and villages in the county to say, bring together older adults, hold focus groups in this way, build councils in this way, and make sure that you're planning with older adults and not for older adults. So transportation and mobility, of course, is a really big challenge for us. And we know about different barriers, so I'll say that because I know that's some of the questions that we're getting into. But it's really about empowering an independent and autonomous life, not unlike all of us want, right? I want to be able to go where I want to go, when I want to go there, in a way that's something that I want to do. So whether it's walking or biking or the bus or Uber or scooters or whatever it is, we need to make sure that every option feels equal to driving. So, thank you.
Okay, great. You can see why we chose this panel. People working very hard in different aspects of equity, building equity in Columbus. So we just have a few questions I'm going to throw out to the panel, and then we can have an interactive discussion with the audience. So get your thinking caps on and think some good questions. I want to ask the panel, and anyone can jump in any order, we don't have to do it alphabetically. In the past few years, what do you think we're doing right in Columbus when it comes to mobility and equity, and what would you like to see improve? Anyone who wants to jump in, you go first. Go ahead, Katie.
Oh,
sorry.
And I'm going to just talk about this on a community perspective because that's where I see it. So as a community member, as a leader, we get a lot of information about what's going on. And I think one of the things that we've done well in Columbus is just start talking about it, right? We got to start somewhere, having people be more understandable. You guys have seen the expansion of bike lanes. We have talked about the way that we connect in the city. So a lot of our routes and a lot of our freeways, a lot of our roads go north and south, and going east and west is really hard. CODA took a look at their bus routes and rearranged some of that to have people connect better so it doesn't take 3 hours to get to a location. We have, I think, started talking about Columbus as more of a regional hub. You brought that up, being able to connect to other cities, looking at advancements. We have talked a lot about technology, connect people through technology. And then I think we have just started on this kind of more holistic approach to talking about these issues where we are looking at transportation in particular as a means of helping people have their best life, like you mentioned. And we're starting to talk about that last mile. We're talking about access and affordability and things like that. So I think Columbus in the past years has done really well just talking about it and getting ideas and engaging organizations and really being open, right, to concepts. And I know the funding isn't there. The funding is never there. But being able to try things in unique ways and just having that open dialogue, I think we've done really well at.
Anyone else, please?
I think you're right on with one of the best things that has happened lately in transit is conversations or transportation. I think we can thank Mayor Ginther a lot for that and the Smart Cities Initiative because it really brought that to the forefront. I think a lot of people that were in the transportation sphere were already thinking about it, but now I think the public is thinking about it. We've seen a big groundswell of support for transit, for additional transit, for additional bike lanes, et cetera, these active transportation modes. And so I think that's been really important, and it has helped spur a lot of planning efforts. So we've had a massive amount of planning efforts lately. And I think, we can talk more about where we need to go in terms of execution, but I think we know where we want to go, we know where we need to go, and we just need to make it happen. And I think we've set ourselves up well, I think, so that's what we've done well.
What do you think is the biggest barrier to getting where we want to go?
I think funding is, of course, the biggest barrier, and I think figuring out how we can fund these improvements and really committing ourselves. So we've talked a lot about it, but we need to, as a community, commit to making this an effort that really has to transform the city. I mean, it's really important from the standpoint of infrastructure. It's not just about building a light rail line or a bus rapid transit line. I mean, we need to add sidewalks, we need to add bike lanes, we need to shift the mindset in our community from the car to the person and how the person is going to get around, not how the car is going to get around. So,
Very good.
yeah.
Other panelists, what are we doing well? What are we doing lousy? What are the barriers?
I'll just add from the grassroots community level, there is a big surge in neighborhood-based programs and systems that are doing really well. So volunteers, neighbors driving neighbors, you have Empowerbus, right? So individuals sort of stepping up and stepping out and filling small pieces of the continuum that might need a little bit more pushing.
I think some things that we're doing well are we're bringing together the public and private sector to address a challenge that we're all facing. I think some of the things that we're going to have to do is clearly articulate some firm visuals that people will see what transportation can look like and articulate that vision a bit better. Just from being involved in past transportation initiatives that have failed, Racy Passenger Rail, and other initiatives, we have to get the average person's buy-in as opposed to just getting the folks that are kind of yay, ooh, this is an exciting new thing. I think we're getting there. I think the average person is starting to think a lot more about transportation and mobility and how it ties to wealth and how it ties to how it ties to people living their best lives the way they want to live it. But I think we still have a long way to go.
Aslyne, do you want to add anything?
I was just trying to think if I was going to add value to a lot of the points you've already said, because I agree with that. I think, the positives, I think, are that we're talking about all. I think the negative is that not all are always considered in some of the things that are executed on. So it's easy to talk about all, but it's hard in some cases to actually execute that. And so I think what becomes critical is if we have the plan, how do we backward plan into that? And when we're talking about folks and connection, right? You talked about people, and I love that, right? But I also think it's about, we talk about Columbus being a welcoming city. How do we welcome people into our communities, not just to come and work and leave, to go back to their own space, but to stay and play? I think that's really important, because you might be somebody who lives in Linden but goes and works in New Albany, in the New Albany Beauty Park, and then you go home, right? But how are you welcome in New Albany? How do you stay for lunch if that's possible? I mean, that's a bigger problem, but again, I think we have to think, when we talk all, we have to think about how we execute for all.
Hold on to the microphone for a second, things. I want to raise a question about public-private partnerships. Of course, we know that, transportation more generally has been provided mostly by the public sector in the past, and now we're seeing the entry of private sector companies like Empowerbus. And obviously this is a benefit, there's some synergies to be had there, but then we have the problem where, I'll give you an example, which would be cargo, where they were here and then suddenly with a week notice they were gone, when people were depending upon that. So can you talk a bit about the advantages and disadvantages, this is for the whole panel by the way, about public and private partnerships and how we plan for a transportation future when private sector companies can be a bit ephemeral? Hopefully not, but it does happen if the market's not there.
Sure, yeah. So we know that Columbus is going to grow, and with that growth is going to become congestion. And so at some point this will be a pain point for everybody, because somebody who's sitting in their car who might be driving a Lexus might be really upset about being in traffic for so long, right? And they might just choose to get into that ride share because it reduces congestion, right? I think when you think about public and private, we as Empowerbus think about the person first. So we're a social enterprise, but we know we're not the only way to get around town, and we shouldn't be the only way to get around town. And we should be thinking about how we partner effectively with CODA and other transportation solutions. So I don't think it's too far out of the line to think about somebody getting to CODA's park and ride and using Chariot Share and Empowerbus, but that when they get dropped off, they might end up getting on a scooter, a bike, or walking, right? Because that's also a good way to get, because maybe their walk is only a block. And I think the important thing is that the city wraps around the public and private, which we do really well here. But you're right, if it doesn't work out, they will leave. Like, we have an investment in Columbus because we're homegrown. Chariot does not have an investment in Columbus because they're not homegrown, right? If it doesn't work here, they will go somewhere else. And that they're a business, they're a for-profit business who is looking at their bottom line. So the reality of it is, if we want to keep them, in some cases, it's going to be public, private, and individuals saying we need this. But that's a mindset shift too.
Others?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting if anyone, and it helps that I'm an urban planner, studies the history of transportation in this country. CODA is a public transportation body now, but it wasn't historically. The New York subway was for-profit at one time. So were all of our transportation systems. And we saw that something happened and that didn't work out. And I think that it's great that there's a lot of innovation, but whether any of this plays out long term, whether Uber, Lyft, the scooters, the dockless bike shares, Car2Go, whether any of these things are actually financially sustainable is still an open question. So when things get dropped in, they can get pulled out very quickly. And I think that we need to think as a region about how we actually integrate some of these things into our public transportation system, so that maybe they continue to be a public service in the long term. I think it would be great if these do work out, if Uber and Lyft and all of these companies are financially sustainable and it makes sense long term. But then an equity question starts to come into that as well. And so I think the for-profit companies are here to make money, and that's fine, and they are providing a service that I'm sure most of us in this room have used and enjoy. I really enjoy the scooters personally. If it doesn't work out for them, it's not going to work out for them, and they're not necessarily they're not a social enterprise. They're not in the business of helping people just to help people. they're in the business to make money, and so we have to think about how that's actually going to work long term.
Public-private partnerships have been around for a very long time, particularly in the transit space. And Dakota as a contracted private partner with First Transit. The only constant is change in our space, and in government, we have to be more nimble and ready to receive that change. CODA is looking to be the voice of mobility for the region. And for the first time, ODOT, CODA, MORPC are looking at all the transportation sources that are out there for all different types of transportation and trying to bring them together. So I think the P3 is here to stay no matter what, and I would throw in that third pillar of nonprofit in there. And I think it's good. I think we just have to be nimble enough to make it a success.
What else, Katie?
Just one last piece. So I think you all brought up a good point around we can't be reliant on one thing, right? And so there's maybe a fourth pillar, public, private, nonprofit, personal. So making sure that we understand all the options and we don't become too reliant on one. So right now, we're really car-centered, right? But most of us will outlive our ability to drive by 7 years. And so if we're not thinking about other options and thinking around having true alternative transportation more than one other option, then we can just find ourselves being in the same boat with the same problem, but in an autonomous vehicle or whatever it might be, right? So one size does not fit all.
Jennifer, you want to add anything?
No,
Okay.
There's like new question.
Well, I want to open it up to the audience now. Just to give you, we have more questions, but let's hear from you now, so please. Let me turn that mic up because it's a little quiet.
Can you hear me?
Can we have somebody
The
else
audience?
ask a question? Specifically?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm Cleve Ricksecker. I work in the Special Improvement Districts downtown. I'm so skeptical about our ability to have an equitable transportation system because as a community, we continually enable bad decision making. We have a problem getting employees to employers because we allow employers to, locate helter-skelter around the outer belt with no thought about connections to public transit. We have an extremely segregated community because we enable one-class suburbs to develop by building new interchanges and widening highways. And so my question is it even possible to build an equitable transportation system given our current inability to have any discipline as a community?
Ooh, big question. Who wants to touch that one?
What I like about being a human being is that anything is possible. I think it takes a will. I think it takes a voice and a leading voice to bring together a group. Sometimes it's on a panel. I think it's going to be a concerted effort between land use professionals and policymakers. I think people think of transportation as very a narrow space, but there's so many different things that affect it. And so for us, we're going to have that clear vision. We're going to have to clearly articulate everything you just said, Cleve, that these are things that affect the ability for our transportation to become equitable. We have to socialize that across many different neighborhoods, classes, etc., businesses. And then we all, as a community, have to come together. We've done it before, the Columbus Way. Now, that's bringing together the public-private sector. But if we if we can develop that vision soon, clearly articulate those barriers to that vision, and bring together the right minds, we've never again been in a better position to solve it through technology, through data, through re-education. And I think we can get there, but it may not be in my lifetime. But we want it soon. But we've got to have the young leaders in the room step up and remember what you hear in panels like this and take it forward to your entire community. But we also, as professionals now, have to start to lay a clear foundation of what we want and start to tackle the barriers to get there.
Lisa, you got comments?
Well, two things to address that. I think first we have to have our political leaders stand up and say that this is something that we're committing to as a region, and that we're going to, obviously we can't force anybody to make any decisions, but that we're going to strongly encourage that we develop our region in this manner. I think we're getting there. I don't think we're quite there yet. And then I think we have to have physical infrastructure. What does it matter if we say, oh, we want to, make well-connected places if we don't actually build something to connect them? So it'll become easier to say, hey, warehouse employer, you need to locate at this bus rapid transit stop, or you should. It'd be easier to do that if we had rail bus rapid transit in this community, or a light rail line, or some other kind of infrastructure that was permanent. Currently, we don't have that, and so it becomes easy for things to just to become, decentralized. And so I think when you look at regions that have done this, like DC, which of course, has a lot of funding and still has its issues, but you can see how the growth has actually physically happened around these transit lines, and so that's what we have to do, long term. And I think we're close to doing that, but that's yet to be determined.
I think it's possible. I think that it's going to take, this is like one of those like flip the table kind of like questions for me, because that's why Empowerbus was born, and we're talking big things. So I asked our riders, I rode and sometimes I drive, and I said, let me ask you a question. Where do you shop? And they said Kroger, Walmart. And I thought, okay, so what if we take, instead of 15 passenger, we make it 12? And the back part of that is cargo space, so that they can click list and we get their groceries. Because if they can't get to work because they don't have a vehicle, how do they get to the grocery store? So it's going to take innovation beyond technology. It's going to take somebody asking the person, right? Because we can service, and we are opening up our service to professional workforce. So taking folks from, some of the big companies downtown, going and picking them up. But they also want convenience. They also want to be able to pick up their groceries. So why can't we do that in the same vehicle, right? So it doesn't have to, it's going to take people being innovative on behalf of people. Amazon was a book company, and now it's all about convenience. And some people have their pros and cons about Amazon, but the thing is that they've thought about how to be more convenient for people and save time. Everybody wants a little bit of time back, especially if you work in a warehouse on your feet for 12 hours and you need to go home, and somewhere in between there you need to sleep and provide for your family. So why can't we get you your groceries? So it's going to take asking questions about convenience and about, and it is going to take data and knowing how to plan effectively in the city. But when you're a more nimble company, you can go north, south, east, west in a quicker way than something that's already has its parameters in how they travel. I think it's possible.
Other questions? Thank you.
I'm Mark Barbash. I teach in the Glenn College and have done economic development for a long time. I don't want to get too granular, but I will anyway. Is anyone giving any thought to the question of the funding base for the public funding base for transportation? In one regard, we are very lucky in Central Ohio, and that is we have CODA, and we are a community that runs in circles. If you want to go from Canton to Cleveland or to one of the suburbs, you have to ride a different bus system in every county, which makes it even worse. So I'm just wondering how far we can take this question of regional collaboration to regional funding. I mean, we fund sewers regionally, essentially. And I'm wondering where are the learning points on this question?
Public transit funding is such a topic in Ohio, and I think when we talk about equitable funding for transportation, we're going to have to shift the entire conversation to from a subsidy into an investment, and that's where we have that biggest challenge. One of my cohorts, Jody Barrick, participated in a big table conversation, and it's like, what if employers started to treat transit passes like they treat a 401k? they treat it like a benefit and start to change the conversation more to focus on people that may use it if they have the opportunity as a benefit. And I think the more that we mainstream it, the better we have as an opportunity as a region to come together with funding. At some point, we have to stop letting our state leaders off the hook. Every budget cycle, every 2 years, transit funding used to be like 50 million, and then it dropped to like 11 per year. And I might be holding steady at 16 or 20.
Was that like 7?
Okay, so
Compared to what for highways?
if you throw in the federal funding, sometimes around 2 billion. If you throw in the turnpike money, it's about about 2 billion. That does not count the local contributions and taxations. But again, we have to get, it has to be a public, private, nonprofit, all personal conversation where we get everyone to view transit as a regional problem. In Columbus and Central Ohio, where driving isn't that bad, congestion is just not there, we have to have a social reason to get people to want to adopt. So I haven't personally been engaged in any recent transportation conversations about funding public transit and about funding highways. We are going to have the conversation about funding highways as well. New more fuel efficient vehicles are coming online, electrification, and our dollar for just investing in highways is ticking down. But we all are going to have to come to the table and put a package together. And I think instead of letting lawmakers decide, we as voters are going to have to decide what's important for us to invest in for our communities. And because they don't, there's a tax, that tax trigger to them means they're not sitting in that chair 2 years later after they're elected. So we're going to take it out of those, few hundred folks' hands and put it into the 11 million Ohioans that are represented, by the parents and everybody else.
If I can make a comment on that, we know from transportation economics that all forms of transportation require subsidies. The difference is how we talk about that. We don't talk about subsidies when it comes to roads, but we do talk about it when it comes to public transportation. And in a sense, driving is the most socialized form of transportation, the most socialist form of transportation that requires the most government intervention and the most funding. And we view public transit as being somewhat socialist, but it's exactly the opposite.
Well, I think the other thing, since we are talking about equity, is there are other reasons behind that, and there are other, you look at who uses transit versus who uses roads, and why do we have to vote on transit levies, which is kind of, there's some racial connotations and some issues regarding that, especially in our community. And so I think when we look at the system, where is a lot of the money going, and where, especially the state money, it's going into these big interchanges and to open up suburbs and the inner cities and our transportation network in the city. We don't get any of that funding, and we have to vote on our funding.
Anyone else on the panel want to add some comments?
It's not so much to the funding, because that's not my wheelhouse. It kind of goes back to your point about looking at the system and the way the system was built. And you specifically mentioned the way the city got carved up by freeways and the way that our foundation has been built. We used to have streetcars. We used to have people all the time were on what we would consider public transportation. And when you bring in these layers of what I'm going to call privilege, which may be a trigger word for some of you, and who is riding transit, who is delegated to be on the CODA bus, right? We have to talk about and address all of those things. And if we really want to make an impact, we got to dig a little bit in our past. We got to be okay, because nobody in this room did it. Nobody did it in this room, okay? The systems have been built for a long time, but we have to be okay with talking about race, talking about socioeconomics, talking about the way our community looks, who lives where and why, if we really want to address some of these issues. They have fabulous ideas. You guys have fabulous ideas and passion, and I think if we can do both, we possibly could see a change. But your question is a bigger social question. And we have a hard time still, even in Columbus, talking about things like race and socioeconomics.
Good, thank you. There's a question here in the audience.
Yeah, I'm Neil Drobny. I teach in the Fisher College of Business. Are there any cities in the U.S. or around the world that you or professionals who work in your space would consider to be role models for how they handle transportation and equity?
I mean, I don't even want to get into international examples because they're so good that it will make us feel very bad. Yeah, so I would prefer to stick to places that are more like peers of Columbus, and I would say places like Denver, which is building a huge network and had nothing 20 years ago. Minneapolis is a very close peer city to us and is doing really great things. And those are two that spring to mind. Even Seattle. I mean, there's cities around the country, but even a place like Indianapolis has really changed the way that they're talking about transit, and they have recently passed a transit ballot measure. And so I think what we have to do is look at those other peer cities and learn, and also learn from the peer cities that are doing it bad. I mean, Nashville is not in a good place right now, especially as they just lost a major ballot measure for funding transit. And we have to decide as a community, do we want to end up like Atlanta and Houston, or do we want to end up like Minneapolis and Denver? Do we want to be a livable city, or do we want to be a car-centric city? And so far, we haven't always made the right decisions there, so hopefully we can change that.
Other comments from the panel? Okay, there's a question here in front.
I'm Jennifer Aberzazy. I work at the College of Dentistry, and we have a lot of conversations, often in conjunction with our Med Center friends, about public health and equity. And so I'm just curious if any of your organizations have any current initiatives in the forward plan in the pipeline to address the health earnings.
So that's like the second layer of Empowerbus. WOSU has done an amazing documentary series called Chasing the Dream, and one of it is specifically around dentistry and access to dental care and how it impacts somebody's life. And the one thing that I thought was so profound is that, when you can't take care of your teeth, it impacts your speech, it impacts your appearance. And so anybody who was in hospitality then can no longer get jobs because they don't want you front facing. So you become a shadow employee is how I see it, right? You are only allowed to work where no one sees you because you didn't have the proper dental care and access to that, and that being one of the furthest things that happens when you're thinking about taking care of yourself. So they have an amazing documentary series, Chasing the Dream. And we are thinking about that. So we have thought about what does it look like with an employer to say, how do we layer in doctor's visits, even if it's just at a very minimal, your annual checkup, your 6-month dental care. How do we do that so that it works in conjunction with the employer and the insurer? It's hard, but it's doable. The thing is that a lot of this is logistics. And so if we were able to build an outstanding logistics team, I think we could figure out quite a bit of issues. So here's another one, childcare. So if you're working anywhere, if you are professional workforce or entry level, you have to think about how your child is going to get there, especially if you don't have a vehicle. Or if you have a really crappy vehicle, that child probably shouldn't even be in there. So what if Empowerbus went and picked up your kids in a child care bus where the bus driver is car seat certified, CPR certified, is an expert in this child care, picks up your child, goes back and picks you up, takes you to work, has your groceries for you, and then also figures out how to take you to your appointments. The technology that we're using allows us to go from fixed route to on-demand. So we are thinking about this for medical appointments, because a lot of times it's very individual-centric, right? I have an appointment at 9, but you have an appointment at 11. I don't care about your appointment, I care about my appointment. So how do we do this on-demand thing that is less expensive than an Uber and Lyft and is equitable and gets people around? What if we're going to the same place? Can I pick you up? I think it's really going to come down to some real good logistics, but we are thinking about it. I don't know when we'll execute, but it is so top of mind for me, and it is so important. And we just, and healthcare being another layer.
Comments?
Do we have time?
Yep.
Okay. So I don't necessarily have answers, but let me just share a couple of the, quite honestly, very scary questions out there right now. Do any of you know that we have a caregiver shortage? We have a caregiver crisis right now, right? So there's so many people that need care, and caregiving is a undervalued job. So you're thinking $10 or $11 an hour, but you also have to have a car and go provide the home health care, right? So if you're a paid caregiver, there's a number of problems that you could face there. If you're a family caregiver and you have to take off work to get someone to an appointment, there are a number of issues there, right? We're also talking about individuals skipping medical appointments because they can't get there, they can't afford it. Individuals not picking up prescriptions after medical appointments. What if you're hospitalized and you need to go home after the hospital, but you don't necessarily need to go home via ambulance, right? You need somebody to come pick you up. Follow-up appointments after hospitalizations, how are you getting to those, right? So even the medical system is really kind of scratching their heads around this, because if someone's re-hospitalized within the 30-day window for the same diagnosis that they went in, the hospital's going to get dinged. So if you're not going to your follow-up appointment, you know, there's all these compounding troubles, and I wish I had some sort of answer. We've got really great people working on it, but it's a heavily layered challenge right now. But I do want to give one plug to CODA's paratransit. Amy Hoffman, I don't know if any of you all know her, but she runs the paratransit. She's amazing. And what they're doing at CODA Mobility Services is innovative and different. And if you haven't been there, you need to go there and you need to see it, because they're really pushing the limits on what we're doing in paratransit too.
Any final comments from other panel members?
I just have one, which is, you probably all know there's an election coming up, and Transit Columbus is putting together a voter guide. We've done this several times in the past, and so we are going to have a voter guide that hopefully has answers from all of our state reps in this area, any local officials, and state and federal officials as well, asking them the tough questions, similar to what have been asked today, as to how they're going to address these issues. So look for that before you go vote.
Anyone else? Okay, I think we all agreed this was an awesome panel. Thank you very much for your time. I think we had started a great conversation today. And don't forget, November 9th, Todd Littman, and November 16th, Maureen McConnell, also talking about mobility equity. Thank you for coming today. Drive safely, walk safely, scooter safely.
Thanks for getting me here today.